The rain was a solid sheet, a gray curtain drawn across the city, and I stood on the rooftop during storm helicopter pad unused for years, the wind tearing at my coat. It wasn't a choice, not really. The concrete beneath my boots was slick, treacherous, but the air up here felt cleaner, less thick with the city's stale breath. It was a temporary reprieve, a place to breathe before the descent. My hands, usually steady with a brush, trembled as I gripped the rusted railing. Metal was cold, biting through my gloves, and I could feel the vibration of the wind shuddering through the entire structure. Below, the city lights bled into watery streaks, a watercolor smeared by the downpour. My lawyer, a man whose face I could barely recall through the haze of paperwork and polite condolences, had called this morning. His voice, a low drone, had delivered the news. My grandmother, a woman I hadn't seen since I was a child, since she was still alive, had passed. And he had left me everything: Blackwood Manor, a place I'd tried to scrub from my memory, a place that had festered in the dark corners of my mind for decades, a place that held Leela. The thought sent a familiar prickle down my spine, a phantom sensation like icy fingers tracing my vertebrae. I squeezed my eyes shut, the rain lashing against my face, trying to wash away the image. A porcelain smile, glass eyes that seemed to follow. A dress the color of faded roses. Leela, my art, my escape, my entire life's work was built on the rubble of that childhood, or so I told myself. But lately the control felt like an illusion. This inheritance, this Blackwood Manor, felt less like a windfall and more like a summons. A particularly violent gust of wind slammed into me, forcing me to brace myself. The helicopter pad, a relic of a forgotten era, groaned under the strain. The faded yellow markings on the concrete were barely visible through the deluge. I imagined the roar of rotors, the dust kicked up, the frantic rush of departures. Now only the relentless drumming of rain and the keening of the wind. It was a fitting soundscape for the turmoil churning within me. The lawyer had mentioned a caretaker, a Mrs. Gable, an old family retainer, he'd said, someone to oversee the property until I could make arrangements. Arrangements for what? To sell it. To burn it to the ground? Not until I faced it. Not until I faced her. My phone, a useless slab of glass and metal in this downpour, buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. The world below was a distant, muted hum. Up here it was just me, the storm, and the ghosts. The wind whipped my hair across my face, stinging my eyes. I could almost taste the metallic tang of fear, a flavor I knew too well. I remembered the last time I'd seen Leela. I was 7. She sat on a dusty shelf in the attic, her painted smile a grotesque mockery of cheerfulness. My grandmother had warned me, his voice a dry rustle like dead leaves. He doesn't like to be disturbed, Dean. But I had been drawn to him, a morbid fascination that was both terrifying and irresistible. And then, the world had tilted. I had screamed, I had run, and I had never looked back, until now. The inheritance papers were in my briefcase, still dry somehow, tucked away from the elements. They represented a new chapter, a forced reckoning. Blackwood Manor wasn't just a house. It was the crucible of my deepest anxieties, the birthplace of my nightmares. The wind howled, a mournful cry that seemed to echo the despair I felt. My determination, the thin veneer I'd carefully constructed over years of therapy and artistic sublimation, felt like it was cracking under the pressure of the storm. What was I going to find when I opened the doors of Blackwood Manor? The helicopter pad was slick with rain, the concrete a dark mirror reflecting the bruised sky. Years of neglect had left it cracked and weed-choked, a forgotten monument to a wealth that felt as distant as the churning clouds. I pulled the collar of my coat tighter, the wind, a physical force trying to pry me from the edge. The city lights below were blurred, smeared by the downpour, but they offered no comfort. Only a vast, indifferent expanse. I'd come here, to the rooftop of Blackwood Manor, not for the view but for the air. It felt less suffocating up here, a temporary reprieve from the oppressive weight that had settled on me the moment I'd seen the solicitor's letter. The descent was a slow, deliberate act of self-punishment. The air grew heavy with the scent of damp rot and something else, something cloying and faintly sweet, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun. It clung to my clothes, my hair a spectral embrace. The main entrance loomed, a massive oak door warped and scarred as if it had weathered 1,000 storms. I pushed it open. It groaned, a sound of protest, of ancient joints protesting intrusion. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that fought their way through grimy, leaded windows. The air inside was stagnant, thick with the smell of old paper, decaying velvet, and that same sickly sweet odor, stronger now. My footsteps, usually sure, seemed to falter on the worn Persian rug, its once vibrant patterns faded to muted ghosts. Portraits lined the walls, their subjects' eyes seeming to follow my every move, their painted gazes filled with a silent, unnerving judgment. My grandmother. I recognized her in some, her features harder, her smile absent. In others, the faces were unfamiliar, stern and severe, ancestors I'd never known. I moved through the downstairs rooms, each one a tableau of a life frozen in time. The drawing room, dominated by a vast, cobweb-draped chandelier, held furniture upholstered in faded brocade, arranged as if awaiting guests who would never arrive. A piano sat silent, its keys yellowed like ancient teeth. I ran a finger over the cool ivory. In the library, shelves sagged under the weight of leather-bound volumes, their pages brittle with age. The air here was thick with the scent of old paper, a comforting aroma that did little to dispel the growing unease. I picked up a book at random. The title was worn away, but as I opened it, a dried, pressed flower, a deep crimson, fell from between the pages. Its petals were brittle, crumbling at my touch. The dining room was dominated by a long mahogany table set for a feast that never happened. Dust lay thick on the silver, the crystal glasses. A single place setting remained, a plate with a few desiccated crumbs, a tarnished fork. It was as if someone had simply walked away mid-meal, leaving the scene undisturbed. I found myself drawn to the back of the house, towards the servants' quarters. The atmosphere here was different, less formal, more utilitarian, but no less unsettling. I opened a door, revealing a small, sparsely furnished room. A child's room, perhaps, though it was too austere for that. A small, wooden rocking horse stood in the corner, its painted eyes chipped, its mane a tangle of frayed yarn. It looked unnervingly lifelike, as if it had been recently ridden. I could almost hear the faint creak of its runners on the floorboards. Then I saw it. Tucked away on a high shelf, almost hidden in the gloom, was a porcelain doll. My breath caught in my throat. It was Leela. Smaller than I remembered, but undeniably her. Her dress, a faded blue silk, was intact, though smudged with dust. The sickly sweet scent was strongest here, emanating from the doll, a potent, sufficing perfume. I felt a prickling sensation on my skin, a phantom touch, as if invisible fingers were tracing patterns on my arms. The rocking horse gave a faint, almost imperceptible sway. Had I imagined it? What had happened in this place? And was Leela truly alone? The wind tore at me, a phantom hand trying to rip me from the rooftop during storm, helicopter pad unused for years. Rain lashed down, each drop a tiny, cold hammer against my skin. I squinted, the flickering beam of my flashlight barely cutting through the downpour. This place, this mausoleum of my grandmother's life, felt like a wound. A deep, festering wound I was now forced to tend. I'd expected dust, cobwebs sure, a pervasive smell of decay, but the air here, even on this exposed perch, was thick with something else. Something cloying and sweet, like overripe fruit left to rot. It clung to the back of my throat, a metallic tang beneath the sweetness. My grandmother, a woman I'd barely known, a ghost in my own family history, had left me this monument to isolation. My boots crunched on loose gravel as I moved towards the edge, the flashlight beam sweeping across the tarnished brass of the defunct helipad. It was useless, of course, a relic, like everything else in this house. I felt a tremor run through the concrete beneath me, not from the wind, but from within, a familiar, unwelcome sensation, the kind that used to grip me when I was a child, a cold knot tightening in my gut. I forced myself to turn away from the precipice, back towards the gaping maw of the house. The storm seemed to churn with a renewed ferocity as I stepped inside, the heavy oak door groaning shut behind me like a dying beast. The sweet, cloying smell intensified, now laced with the musty odor of old paper and mothballs. My flashlight beam danced across the foyer, grand but neglected. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow me. I made my way through the downstairs rooms, each one a tableau of faded grandeur. A ballroom, its once gleaming floor now scuffed and dull. A library, shelves crammed with leather-bound tomes that looked as though they hadn't been touched in decades. I kept expecting to hear something, a floorboard creak, a rustle of fabric. But there was only the relentless drumming of rain against the windows and the low, mournful howl of the wind. This was where she'd kept her collections, the solicitor had said, her treasures. I ran my fingers over the cool, smooth surface of a mahogany desk, the wood scarred with age. My flashlight beam landed on a locked wooden chest tucked away in a corner, half hidden by a moth-eaten tapestry. A tremor, stronger this time, ran through my hand as I reached for the latch. It wasn't a physical vibration, but something deeper, a resonance that vibrated in my bones. I fumbled with the lock, my fingers clumsy and numb. It clicked open with an unnerving ease. Inside, nestled amongst brittle lace and faded silk, was a doll. My breath hitched. My stomach lurched. The air seemed to drain from my lungs. It was Leela. The porcelain face, cracked and yellowed, was fixed in a perpetual, unsettling smile. The glass eyes, a vacant, glassy blue, seemed to stare directly at me, seeing not Dean, the successful artist, but Dean, the terrified child. I recoiled, stumbling back, my flashlight beam skittering across the floor. The doll, Leela, he was real, and he was here. I couldn't breathe. The sweet, cloying smell was overwhelming now, suffocating. My hands began to shake uncontrollably, my grip tight as I gripped the flashlight. The room seemed to tilt, the walls closing in. The glint of those glassy blue eyes in the dim light of my childhood bedroom. My grandmother, he had kept her, he had kept it. It vibrated in my teeth, in my skull. My skin prickled with gooseflesh. I stared at Leela, her painted smile mocking me. The fear, dormant for so long, surged through me, raw and visceral. It was the same fear I'd felt that night, the night I'd tried so hard to forget. The night that had shaped me, broken me. The doll's head seemed to tilt. A fraction of an inch, its painted gaze never leaving me. Was it my eyes playing tricks? The storm? Or was Leela, the child's plaything, stirring from her long slumber? What had my grandmother known? And why had she kept Leela hidden away, only to leave her to me? This place, this mausoleum of my grandmother's forgotten life, felt determined to expel me. Every gust threatened to send me tumbling into the inky blackness below. My knuckles were white where I gripped the corroded railing. I had to see if anything had been dislodged, if the storm had finally breached some forgotten corner of this decaying monument. It was a foolish errand, I knew, born of a desperate need to do something, anything, other than sit in the echoing silence of the house and wait. I'd been up here for what felt like hours, though the storm's fury made time a slippery, unreliable thing. The metal beneath my boots was slick with a greasy film that smelled faintly of rust and something else, something sickly sweet, like overripe fruit left to rot. My breath plumed white, then vanished, swallowed by the gale. It was then, through the drumming of rain and the howl of the wind, that I heard it. It was too faint to be certain, a mere breath against the tempest, but it was there. It sounded like a child's voice, thin and reedy, calling my name. Dean. I froze, my blood turning to ice water. It couldn't be. There was no one else here. I'd checked every room, every creaking floorboard, every cobweb-laden nook since I'd arrived. Just me and the ghosts of this house. I strained my ears, tilting my head against the wind's relentless push. Dean. My flashlight beam swept across the desolate expanse of the rooftop, illuminating only the jagged silhouette of the abandoned helicopter pad and the skeletal remains of a rusted access ladder. Nothing, no one, yet the voice, it felt as real as the biting wind on my cheeks. It seemed to coil around me, to press in from all sides, as if the very air had learned to speak. A sudden, sharp crack echoed from below, followed by the splintering sound of wood. The house groaned, a wounded beast in the storm's embrace. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. It wasn't the storm, not entirely. This felt deliberate. I scrambled back towards the access hatch, my movements clumsy, my mind a frantic scramble of disbelief and a primal, icy fear. You can't hide, Dean. My hands fumbled with the heavy metal latch, my fingers numb and clumsy. I didn't hesitate, dropping through the opening and slamming the hatch shut behind me. I stood at the top of the narrow, winding stairs, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand. Dust motes danced in the light, disturbed by my sudden descent. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of decay and something else. That same sickly sweet perfume, stronger here, almost cloying. It clung to the back of my throat, making me gag. The wood groaned under my weight, a symphony of protest. The walls, once grand, were now peeling, revealing layers of faded wallpaper like strips of dead skin. I told myself it was the storm, the flickering light, my own frayed nerves. I reached the landing and hesitated. The sound of splintering wood came again, closer this time. It emanated from the library, the room where I'd first seen her. My steps quickened, Driven by a morbid curiosity I couldn't suppress, I reached the library door, my hand hovering over the tarnished brass knob. The sweet, decaying scent was overwhelming here, almost suffocating. I could hear a faint, rhythmic scraping sound from within, like tiny fingernails on wood. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I pushed the door open. The storm outside had somehow managed to find a way in, a single pane of glass in the tall, arched window shattered, letting in the wind and the rain. And then I saw it. On the heavy oak desk, amidst the scattered papers and overturned inkwell, lay Leela. He was propped against a stack of ancient books, her porcelain face turned towards me. Her painted smile seemed wider, more predatory in the dim light. One of her button eyes, usually a vacant blue, now seemed to glint with a malevolent intelligence. And beside her, a small, intricately carved wooden rocking horse, its paint chipped and faded, lay on its side. The sound I'd heard, the scraping, it had come from this. It was rocking ever so slightly back and forth on the wet floor. There was no wind strong enough in here to move it. "You brought me back, Dean." I backed away slowly, my gaze locked on the doll and the rocking horse. The rocking horse picked up speed, its gentle sway becoming a frantic, jerky motion. The doll's head tilted, as if watching my retreat with a silent, terrible amusement. What was happening to me? Was this the house? Or was it Leela, her influence seeping into the very fabric of my sanity? The old house groaned around me. Not the settling timbers of an aged structure, but a deep, resonant sigh that seemed to emanate from its very foundations. I stood in the dusty study, the shattered window a gaping maw of blackness against the bruised twilight sky. Leela, the doll, still perched on the rocking horse, her porcelain gaze fixed on me. My breath hitched, a sharp, ragged sound in the suffocating silence. The air tasted of decay and something else, something metallic and acrid. My hands trembled, the grip tight, as I gripped the edge of the mahogany desk. My reflection shimmered in its dark, polished surface, a distorted caricature of myself. My eyes were too wide, my mouth a rictus of fear. The rocking horse creaked, a slow, deliberate rhythm that echoed the frantic thudding in my chest, back and forth, back and forth. Leela's painted smile seemed to widen, a silent, knowing smirk. I had to get out, but my feet felt rooted to the floorboards, heavy and unresponsive. This was more than just a doll, more than just a childhood memory. This was something ancient, something hungry. I turned away from the study, my movements stiff and jerky. Each floorboard protested under my weight, a series of sharp cracks that felt like betrayals. I needed to paint. My studio, a cavernous space in the west wing, beckoned. The storm had begun in earnest by the time I reached it. Rain lashed against the tall, arched windows, a relentless drumming that seemed to beat in time with my racing pulse. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the room in stark, ephemeral flashes. My canvases, stacked against the walls, seemed to watch me, their blank surfaces pregnant with unspoken horrors. The smell of turpentine and linseed oil usually soothed me, a familiar comfort. Tonight it was sharp, almost suffocating, tinged with the same metallic tang I'd tasted in the study. I grabbed a large canvas, its stark white a challenge. My hands moved with a life of their own, reaching for brushes, for tubes of paint. I didn't think, I felt. The fear that had been a dull ache for years, a constant hum beneath the surface of my life, now surged, a flood of raw emotion. I squeezed cadmium red onto my palette, the color so vibrant it seemed to bleed into the dim light. My brushstrokes were frantic, aggressive. I wasn't creating, I was excavating. The rocking horse appeared next, its wooden frame splintered, its painted eyes staring blankly. I dripped black paint onto the canvas, letting it run like tears, like blood. "You remember, don't you, Dean?" I threw myself into the work, my muscles screaming, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I smeared the paint with my fingers, the cool, viscous texture a perverse comfort. A particularly violent clap of thunder shook the house, rattling the windows. I flinched, my hand jerking, leaving a jagged streak of white across Leela's face. But it felt right. It was the shattering of my own denial, the violent intrusion of reality. The painting was no longer just a depiction of my fear. It was the fear, given form and substance. I stepped back, my chest heaving. Leela was there, undeniable, her malevolent gaze piercing the painted surface, reaching out to me. The rocking horse rocked on, a phantom limb of my fractured past. The storm raged. But inside me, a different kind of tempest had been unleashed. I had painted my trauma, and in doing so, I felt an undeniable shift. They were here on the canvas, breathing, waiting. Was this what she wanted? To be seen, to be acknowledged, even in this twisted, horrifying form. The storm had been building all afternoon, a bruised purple bruise on the horizon that finally broke, unleashing a flood of rain. It hammered the old mansion, each drop a tiny fist against the glass. And I found myself drawn upwards, not to escape it, but to feel it. The stairs to the attic were a skeleton's ladder, groaning with every step, but I pushed on, the air growing thick with the scent of dust and decay. The attic door was jammed, swollen with damp. I shouldered it open, the wood splintering with a shriek. Beyond lay the rooftop. Not just a roof, but a vast, flat expanse, parked and cracked like ancient skin, marked with the faded white outline of a helicopter pad unused for years. The wind whipped my hair across my face, stinging my eyes, but I welcomed the assault. It was real, tangible, unlike the shifting shadows that had begun to plague my peripheral vision. The rain, cold and sharp, plastered my shirt to my skin, and I shivered, not entirely from the chill. There, half buried beneath a drift of sodden leaves and debris, was a small, leather-bound journal. My grandmother's handwriting, cramped and spidery, filled its pages. I'd found it tucked away in a rotting wooden chest, its lock rusted shut. It felt like a deliberate hiding place, meant to be discovered only by someone willing to brave the mansion's suffocating embrace. My fingers trembled as I opened it. The ink was faded, the pages brittle, but the words were as sharp as shards of glass. It started with her childhood, a lonely existence in this very house, her only companion a doll. Leela, the name sent a jolt through me, a visceral recoil. Then the entries shifted. Leela wasn't just a doll, he was a vessel, my grandmother wrote, a conduit for something ancient and hungry that had been trapped within the very foundations of this house for generations. My grandmother, a child desperate for connection, had unknowingly fed it, nurturing it with her loneliness, her fear. The storm raged around me, the wind a banshee's howl, and I could feel the house breathing beneath me, a slow, deep inhale and exhale. My grandmother's words spoke of rituals, of desperate attempts to contain the entity, to sever the connection. She tried to destroy Leela, to burn her, to bury her, but the doll always returned, more vibrant, more menacing, her influence seeping into the fabric of the house, into the minds of those who lived within its walls. The entries became frantic, filled with desperate pleas and self-recrimination. He was too close, he saw her, he was too pure, too innocent. Leela demanded it. I couldn't refuse her, not when she showed me, not when she promised me. The ink blurred here, as if from tears or rain. I strained to read the next words, my own breath catching in my throat. The wind tore a loose sheet of metal from a nearby vent, sending it skittering across the rooftop with a violent clang. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the storm's symphony. The child, my grandson, he had to be the sacrifice. Not his life, not entirely, but his light, his memory. Leela needed a new anchor, a new source of fear to feed upon, and I was too weak to stop her. I let her take it, I let her twist him. My grandmother, he had done this. My grandmother, the woman I barely remembered, the one who had sent me away, had actively participated in my torment. The faces in my paintings, the fragmented memories that had haunted my sleep, they weren't just figments of my broken mind. They were echoes of what Leela, through my grandmother, had stolen from me. The rain had lessened to a steady, miserable drizzle, but the wind still tore at me. Below, the city lights twinkled, oblivious to the horror unfolding on this forgotten patch of concrete. I looked down at the journal, its pages now damp and warped. Leela, he was real, and my grandmother had been her accomplice, but why me? What was the ultimate goal of this ancient, hungry entity that had latched itself onto my family, onto this house? What had my grandmother truly been promised that was worth such a devastating price? The rain was a solid sheet now, drumming a frantic rhythm against the grimy windows of the attic. It had been hours since I'd found the photograph. Hours since the icy certainty had settled in my gut. My grandmother knew. He had known about Leela, not just known but facilitated. The doll with its chipped porcelain smile and vacant glass eyes had been a weapon, and I, a child, had been the target. I stumbled out of the attic, the photograph clutched in my trembling hand. The hallway seemed longer, the shadows deeper. Each creak of the old house, each groan of the wind, felt amplified, accusatory. I needed to get out. I needed to see the police. I needed to tell them about the doll, about my grandmother's complicity. I needed to break free from this suffocating legacy. My footsteps echoed on the polished wood of the grand staircase. The house seemed to hold its breath as I descended, the air thick with the scent of dust and decay. The heavy oak door at the front, my usual exit, was no longer there. In its place was a solid, seamless wall of dark, unyielding stone. It felt ancient, impossibly solid. Panic, sharp and sudden, pricked at my skin. I spun around, my gaze darting to the windows. The rain lashed against them, blurring the outside world into a smear of gray and green. It was as if the house itself had sealed me in. A low hum began to vibrate through the floorboards, a resonant thrum that seemed to originate from the very foundations of the mansion. It was a sound I'd heard before, faint and unsettling. During my childhood visits, a sound that always accompanied Leela. My heart, a frantic bird trapped in my chest, began to beat against my ribs. I backed away from the wall, my eyes scanning the familiar foyer, now rendered alien and menacing. The ornate grandfather clock, its pendulum still, loomed in the corner. Its face seemed to leer at me, the numbers distorted, melting into each other. I could swear the hands were twitching, moving backward. This isn't real. I forced myself to breathe, to focus. There had to be another way out, the back door. I remembered a service entrance near the kitchens. The scent of damp earth and something metallic, like old blood, began to fill my nostrils. It was a smell that clung to the edges of my memory, a scent I'd tried to scrub away for years. The kitchen was a tableau of abandonment. Dust sheets covered the appliances like shrouds, but the hum was louder here. A tangible vibration that made my teeth ache. And then I saw it. The back door was gone. It wasn't a door. It was a hole leading into, where? It was high-pitched, innocent and utterly terrifying. Leela. I stumbled backward, my hands flying to my ears, but the sound was inside my head. It burrowed into my skull, twisting my thoughts. The walls of the kitchen seemed to warp, the linoleum floor rippling like water. The dust sheets on the appliances began to stir, as if something beneath them was breathing. I needed to get to the rooftop. My grandmother had mentioned a helipad, a way in, a way out. Perhaps there was a way out there too, away from this prison. I turned and fled, my boots clattering on the warped floorboards. The hum intensified, a deafening roar in my ears. The corridor ahead twisted and turned, the layout shifting with every panicked glance. Doors that had been there moments before vanished, replaced by solid walls. The air grew heavy, suffocating. I could feel something pressing in on me, a palpable weight that made it difficult to breathe. I reached the staircase again, my only thought to ascend. The steps groaned under my weight, each one a protest against my desperate climb. The house seemed to fight me, the very air resisting my movement. The higher I climbed, the more distorted the surroundings became. Portraits on the walls seemed to shift, their painted eyes following my progress. The faces in the paintings, they were familiar, too familiar. They were the faces from my nightmares, the ones I'd tried to erase. I burst through a door and found myself on a narrow, windswept walkway. The rain hammered down, stinging my face. This was it, the rooftop, a vast concrete expanse littered with debris. In the center, a rusted skeletal structure marked where a helipad had once been. It was unused for years, a forgotten relic. But the sky above was not the gray of a storm. It was a swirling vortex of impossible colors, a maelstrom of unnatural hues that made my eyes water. And the wind, it wasn't just wind. I turned back to the door I'd come through, the only apparent exit from this exposed platform. It was gone. In its place, a solid, unyielding brick wall. I was trapped, high above the ground, on a rooftop during a storm, with nowhere left to run. Had I ever truly been able to leave this house? The metallic tang in the air grew sharper, a coppery undercurrent to the pervasive dampness. My footsteps echoed on the flagstone, each one a tiny hammer blow against the silence. I kept my gaze fixed ahead, on the sliver of grayer darkness that promised an exit. The house felt like it was exhaling, a slow, suffocating breath of decay. The corridor opened into a vast, cavernous space. Not the kitchens, though. This was a ballroom. Dust sheets like shrouds draped over phantom furniture. Moonlight, fractured by the storm outside, painted ghostly patterns on the warped floorboards, and in the center, bathed in that spectral light, sat Leela. Her dress, once lace and ribbon, was now a tattered, faded thing. But it was the stillness that unnerved me most. A perfect, unnatural stillness. It wasn't the stillness of an inanimate object. It was the stillness of something waiting. A low hum vibrated through the floor, a sound that seemed to originate from within the very walls. The wind outside howled, a mournful lament that seeped through the cracks and timbers. Rain lashed against unseen windows, a frantic drumming that mirrored the frantic pulse in my own throat. It was all around me, coalescing, focusing. My hands trembled. I clenched them into fists, digging my nails into my palms. Pain, sharp and clean, cut through the rising tide of fear. Focus, Dean. I had to remember what the old journals had hinted at, the fragmented warnings about the doll's origins. Not just a toy, but a vessel, a conduit. And the house, this decaying monument to my family's secrets, was its anchor. A soft scraping sound, my head snapped up. Leela's head had tilted. Just a fraction, my breath hitched. It couldn't be. Dolls don't move, not on their own. But this was Leela. The hum intensified, a low thrumming that vibrated in my teeth. The scent of old blood was stronger now, a metallic stench that made my stomach clench. It was a grotesque, impossible thing, a rictus of painted porcelain. Then the scraping sound came again, louder this time. Her tiny, jointed hand moved, reaching out, not towards me, but towards the center of the room, towards a patch of floor where the moonlight pooled, impossibly bright. A faint light began to emanate from that spot, a sickly green glow that pulsed with the hum. It was like looking into the depths of a poisoned well. I felt a pull, a sickening disorientation, as if the room itself was tilting. My memories, sharp and clear moments ago, began to blur, fragments of childhood fear reasserting themselves. My body felt heavy, sluggish. It was harder to move, harder to think. The doll's influence was a suffocating blanket, smothering my resolve. I could feel the edges of my sanity fraying, the familiar tendrils of madness reaching out. But beneath the fear, a spark of defiance flickered. I wouldn't succumb, not this time. I remembered the stained glass window in the attic, the one that depicted the family crest, the one my grandmother had always warned me never to touch. It was said to be a ward, a protective charm, but it was also a key, a way to sever the connection. The doll's head snapped towards me, the vacant socket seeming to bore into my very soul. A sound, like dry leaves skittering across stone, emanated from her. It was laughter, the voices of my past, twisted and corrupted. "You are mine, Dean, you have always been mine." The green light pulsed again, brighter, harder. The floorboards beneath Leela began to crack, fissures spreading outward like a spiderweb. The hum rose to a deafening pitch, a physical force that pressed against my eardrums. I stumbled back, my hands flying to my ears, but the sound was inside me, resonating in my bones. I had to get to the attic. Now, the knowledge was a fragile shield, but it was all I had. The metallic tang in the air was now overwhelming, thick and cloying. As I ran, a new scent joined the miasma of decay and blood. A faint, almost imperceptible perfume. My grandmother's. It was a ghost of a scent, a memory made manifest. Was she a prisoner or a willing participant? The stairs to the attic were impossibly far. The house groaned around me, a symphony of destruction. The storm raged, and I could feel the old structure straining against its foundations. I was running out of time. The green light from the ballroom seemed to pulse in rhythm with the lightning that flashed outside, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like frantic spirits. I reached the attic door, my hand shaking as I fumbled for the latch. What waited for me on the other side? The green light pulsed again, brighter, harder. I stumbled back, my hands flying to my ears, but the sound was inside me, reverberating through bone and sinew. Leela's porcelain face contorted, not with pain, but with a chilling, triumphant glee. The light intensified, a molten emerald core erupting from the doll's chest. It wasn't a light that illuminated, it was a light that consumed. Dust and splinters rained down from the ceiling. The air grew thick, heavy, smelling of ozone and something acrid, like burnt sugar and old pennies. My vision swam, the edges blurring into a nauseating swirl of green. I felt it then, a tug, a relentless pull drawing me toward the incandescent orb at Leela's center. It was the same pull I'd felt as a child, the one that had locked me in a frozen terror, the one that had warped the familiar into the grotesque. But this time I fought. My feet, rooted to the floor moments before, found purchase. I clawed at the air, my fingernails scraping against nothing. The hum peaked, a shriek that tore through the house. Then a blinding flash, my eyes fluttered open. The green light was gone. The doll Leela was gone. Only a charred circle remained on the floorboards, a black scar against the aged wood. I stood, legs trembling, the phantom echo of the hum still vibrating in my teeth. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the empty space. The storm outside had intensified, rain lashing against the windows with renewed ferocity. Thunder rumbled, a low growl that shook the very foundations of the mansion. A gust of wind howled through a broken pane, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. My gaze drifted to the ceiling. The house, already a ruin, seemed to be actively disintegrating around me. I had to get out. The thought was a primal urge, a desperate instinct for survival, but where? Leela was gone, but what had gone with her? Had I destroyed her, or had I merely released something? The questions clawed at me, sharp and insistent. My feet moved before my mind could protest. I found myself drawn to the back of the house, to a door I'd always avoided, a door that led to a narrow, winding staircase. It was the service stairs leading to the upper levels, to the neglected attic, and beyond that, the rooftop. The storm raged with a primal fury now, the wind whipping around the eaves like a banshee's wail. Rain hammered against the glass of a small, grimy window at the top of the stairs, obscuring the already failing light. I pushed open the heavy, creaking door. The air here was different, stale, metallic, and tinged with the faint, lingering smell of decay. I climbed each step a protest, the wood groaning under my weight. The stairs were steep, cramped, and claustrophobic. I could feel the vibrations of the storm through the walls, the entire structure groaning and shifting. Finally, I emerged. The wind tore at my clothes, plastering my hair to my forehead. Rain stung my eyes, blurring the already chaotic cityscape below. I was on the rooftop during storm helicopter pad unused for years. The concrete beneath my feet was slick with rain. The rusted metal of the old helicopter pad a treacherous expanse. The city lights, usually a comforting beacon, were now distant, distorted smudges through the deluge. I stood there, exposed, vulnerable, the storm washing over me. It felt like a baptism, a violent cleansing. But the cleansing felt incomplete. The green light was gone, Leela was gone, but the imprint of her malevolence, the echo of that hum, remained etched in my very being. Had I truly banished the evil, or had it merely retreated, waiting for another opportunity? Was it truly empty now, or was there still something lurking within its decaying walls, something that had merely shed its porcelain skin?